Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 17th episode of Selling with a Robo. And during the past, we've been speaking a lot about different aspects of how sales is actually being transformed with AI coming into the picture. But today we have a very special guest and our advisor to Marketrix, Christine, as well. Where she's been giving some amazing insights and advice in terms of how we are as we continue to keep on shaping our product as well, right? Today the topic is essentially speaking is on future proofing customer experiences for 2030, right? Because I mean previously, even though we've been really speaking on sales and sales, future of sales, here we come into more of a broader topic in terms of how the customer experience landscape is evolving, right? So it's wonderful to have you today, Christine. Thanks a lot for joining us. Would love to hear about you, first of all, what your experience has been and what has led you to to this current point.
Thanks for having me, Arosha. So I'm a strategy, customer experience, and innovation leader, and I help companies grow through the power of customer centricity and human-centered design. I've worked with large enterprises, Fortune 100 companies, as well as venture-backed startups throughout my career. And I'm excited to be here today to chat about the impact of AI on customer experiences.
Yes, that's a great question. So, I mean, one of the main things I think that you've really been bringing up is on customer experience, right? Because, I mean, I know about sales and marketing, right? And then customer experience is sort of how we can create sort of a cohesive structure, right? In terms of giving the best possible experience, right? Essentially to a customer, as it says as well, right? But for our viewers here, Christine, maybe if you can tell what your take on customer experience is, right? And how the future of this is going to look like.
Absolutely. So, when I think about customer experience design or brand experience design for customers, we're really talking about the end-to-end customer journey from the moment in which they meet your brand through advertising or marketing programs to engagement with your sales organization, to actually buying and becoming a customer, to then what is that buyer experience, and then ownership experience, and then service experience, right? If something comes up and you need support or you need help, how does the company rise up in those moments of challenge to best service the organization? And so I think what's exciting around customer experience design and where it's headed is that technology has already been impacting our ability as designers to create a lot more personalization and intimacy around this journey from end to end. And I think AI is going to unlock a whole new level of opportunity for designers and marketers and sales organizations and customer service organizations to really show up in new and exciting ways, for their customers.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, even during I mean my time so far in Marketrix, and then also during my previous companies as well, I've gone through in terms of how the pre-sales cycle looks like, right? And then how the sales cycle looks like, and how the after sales support should be looked like. So what customer experience sort of does this in my view, how everything properly can be mapped, right? And then how you can provide sort of seamless experience, right? So definitely speaking,
Yes.
this landscape is completely evolving with AI coming in, and then where AI is able to understand the journey from, I think, the first point where either the customer clicks on an email or clicks on an ad, or from that point to the point where the sort of from pre-sale standpoint where the customer has been to becoming an actual customer, and then to be driven towards even to become an advocate, right? So that's I think where we are driving forward, right? So I'd love to hear, Christine, from your view, right? So is there any particular example that you can share, how you sort of design full-fledged customer experience at maybe one of your previous companies?
So maybe I'll speak maybe more broadly than bringing up maybe a specific example, but I think at the end of the day, what we want to start with is, what is the brand about, right? What is that emotional equity that an organization, whether that's a B2B organization or a B2C organization, is trying to create in the world. What is that experience really about at the end of the day? And then we start to think about, okay, well, if the brand is about this, how do we show up then in our communications and our marketing materials, right? And we've been doing this for forever as
Right.
marketing and individuals. And then, we start to then say, okay, well, how do those interactions look like when we now have the ability to actually engage much more deeply in that conversation, right? And we, in the
Right.
early 2000s, and the advent of social media allowed us for the first time as marketers to start to engage in these two-way interactive discussions. But AI is now taking that to the next level, right? So we start to think about, well, how do we show up? How do we have these conversations? And then, secondly, we then start to think about, well, when this relationship passes to an actual human, right, moves into the sales organization, again, how do we think about how that interaction unfolds and shows up? And what are the tools? What are the technologies? What are the resources that we're sort of equipping that moment in time to
Yeah.
really meet the customer where they are at the end of the day? And then lastly, when you start to think about onboarding, right? What does that look like? How do we use technology to sort of solve that? And then ultimately, getting into the sort of support side of things, thinking about the sort of specifics of that emotional equity, again, of how do you deal with a problem at a human level in a
Yeah.
way that resonates with that brand idea. And so we really want to, think about that cohesively end to end.
Yeah, so I think, like, I mean, some of the keywords that I've very much been hearing within this space, this question, like, omni-channel, right? So then how can this, like, this, whenever we are creating this experience, how they can be omni-channel? Because now the customers are not just expecting, like, them to be recognized in the digital channels, right? So when we go into like a particular product, like, how we are maybe being greeted, right? And then, like, how we can be provided with more of an intuitive support, right? Rather than just like, because I mean, we all have gone through bad customer support experiences, right? So then now, like, when we've been a customer with this particular X product for, I don't know, like, 10 odd years, right? But when I go into the ticketing system, they don't even recognize me, right? So then what would that make us feel like? So then, but I mean, now I think, like, that space has been resolved to a great degree now, right? But now actually customers are very much expecting how these experiences can become omni-channel, right? So then, like, whenever you go into, like, the website, or like, when you go into a store, how they are supposed to know, like, what sort of your history has been. Not just that, but also, like, what the predictive analytics, like, is going to look like, right? So so within that space, Christian, I think, like, one of the main things that you brought up is, like, these trends, right? In terms of like how these experiences are going to be augmented, right? And then, like, how are going to be expanded, like, in the future, right? And you brought up a very good point, like, that got like, of this Gartner stat, right? So would love to hear
Yeah.
about this thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about sort of where things are headed, right? What are the trends? Sort of how is the space evolving? And I think the thing that comes to mind for me is that AI avatars at the end of the day are really going from something that was sort of seen as sort of this niche thing to actually being highly necessary, right? We talk a lot about some studies that have been out. Gartner saying that by 2025, 1 year from now, 70% of all digital and marketing communications are going to be supported by AI avatars. And companies like McKinsey even report that companies that are using AI for sales and marketing are really able to increase their revenue by 70%. And if they do that, they're also decreasing their costs by near 30%, right? So there's so much power in this to be able to really drive efficiency into the process on the sales and marketing side. But that continues down the journey, right? That doesn't just stop at sales and marketing. We know that, it's been forecasted that companies that are using AI technologies are able to reduce their handling time for customer service requests by 70%. I mean, that's huge. That's
Yeah.
material, right?
Yeah.
So I really believe this technology is going to be a major game changer. And I think it comes down to a couple of really big reasons, right? And we're all facing similar challenges today, regardless of what industry you're in. We know everyone's overcoming budget constraints and resource constraints. And so when we think about that, how can organizations then start to say, well, we need to prioritize our human capital and what they're spending their time on and sort of amplify what they can achieve, right? Do more with less at the end of the day. And that's a fundamental promise of AI avatars, which I think is super compelling. And then the other thing, my focus is really on behavior, right? Understanding people, understanding their needs. And we know that people are shopping differently than they were previously, right? People are shopping in ways that are much more self-service, but simultaneously their expectations on personalization are going up. So they're saying, hey, I want to do it myself. I want to DIY it, but you sure as heck better know who I am and really give me a custom and bespoke experience when I come to your organization. And so I think, when we talk about these trends and these sort of larger themes, it really comes down to our ability to tap into really deep data sets around people to then start to say, okay, how do we show up in the most meaningful ways?
Yeah. So I get the picture that you're trying to sort of you're bringing this in. So and at the same time now with Marketrix, one of the main things that we are pushing forward is this AI avatars, right? Because why we very much drive these AI avatars forward, if you look at because in my honest opinion, Christian, when we look at the AI landscape, yes, it has been there for quite a long time, but this whole craze started to happen just about roughly about 2 years before, right? So with OpenAI's ChatGPT, they resolved the sort of the textual piece, right? Where you are able to with prompt engineering and everything, you are able to get a lot of things done, right? Then the audio piece also came into picture, right? So then now for this webinar prep, I was actually speaking with ChatGPT, right? So that I am able to be better prepared, right? Sort of with regards of the pointers, insights and things like that, right? So I believe essentially the next thing, it would be the visual piece, Christine, right? So then we have all seen in in the sci-fi movies and everything, right? Whereas the avatars or robots are actually essentially very much blended with the human experience, I would say, right? So these essentially the next step would be, right? So then how can this visual aspect, right, sort of with the sentiment analysis, how can I understand what you're feeling right now, right? Based on that, how can because how you would interact with sort of text is different on how you would interact with audio. And once again, when it's visual, it's quite different, right? It's sort of similar to how I would maybe WhatsApping with you, or else how I would be having a phone call with you, and then how I'm on a video call with you, right? So or else how I'm actually in a real in-person meeting with you, right? So I think this is sort of the direction where sort of technology is evolving towards to, right? And this is where where we are quite driving this towards the AI avatars coming in, right? So of course our initial starting point is coming in where our AI avatars act as a website concierge, right? But from there, how our AI avatars can go into the product landscape in terms of giving product demos, right? In terms of doing sales pitches, right? So the final future that I would love to see is how Marketrix's AI avatars can become sort of holography characters, right? And then even be deployed in a storefront, right? So this is sort of the direction that I believe where avatar technology is progressing, right? But would love to hear your thoughts, Christian. I know that you have brought in some very good insights, right? But would love to hear a little bit more on that front.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with sort of the evolution of technology and how brands are sort of interacting with people through this process. And you're absolutely right. The fact that technology can now respond to human emotions with natural language processing, with sentiment analysis, and show up in ways that are empathetic, that are friendly, human, with a little bit of humor, right? At the end of the day, that ability changes the way in which we engage. And it changes the way in which we feel about an interaction at the end of the day. I mean, I think we've all experienced in our own personal lives sort of sort of quick dismissiveness that text can feel like versus a more face-to-face interaction. And so I think there's huge opportunity as we start to think about these connected omni-channel experiences and how we now have a chance to bring the people within a company to life for people in ways that they've never been able to do that before, like you said, in a retail store or in a customer service experience, or even just in an online interaction. And to do that in a way that is so innately human and so much more personality to it than we've ever had before, I think is going to be super exciting. And we are just at the cusp of our ability to create that. And I think in the next few years, we're going to really see a lot of experimentation from brands standing up these entirely new, experiences. And I wonder, this is, kind of out there in the back of my head, I do wonder what that will mean for brands that have human-based characters, right? You think about Flo from Progressive Insurance and, brands like that already have a human sort of representing that interaction. What does that mean as we start to think about all the other people that might be able to show up in that way? So I don't know, those are things that just sort of get me excited from a creative standpoint. But we're visual people at the end of the day. We enjoy seeing things come to life and participating in these ways. And I think it's going to be very cool.
Yeah, and at the same time, Kristen, like now I think, like, I mean, say with AI, like, and robotics even coming in, right? We see a lot of, like, these boring tasks, right? In maybe a manufacturing flow being taken up by, say, robotics, right? So then now when we think about, say, sales and customer experience, right? It's like, what I've seen is it's a lot, like, there is a lot of personal relationship, right? Especially when it comes to B2B as well, right? B2C also, you can't say no as well, especially like, when it comes to luxury goods and all, like, that personal touch is quite important, right? So you wouldn't just, like, go and buy a bag from Louis Vuitton, just like, I mean, in the same way that you would just, like, purchase from like a e-commerce store, right? Because you would go there to the store also for that experience, right? And, like, that the experience, for that experience, the role of, like, the salesperson, right, plays is, like, quite important, right? So now this is where, in my opinion, Christian, like, how like AI avatars coming into the picture, right, can really create, like, like more of a cohesive and a seamless experience, right, as we drive things forward.
Absolutely. And, we think about on the B2C side from it, and I'll talk about B2B in a minute, but on the B2C side, I think there's actually quite a bit of untapped opportunity when it comes to the use of AI avatars. I've worked with premium department store retailers, and part of what we were working on around their experience design was identifying the moments of friction that you actually need to keep in the experience, because it makes people feel that they're getting a high level of customer service. Like, you could absolutely, make something 100% frictionless, but then people don't feel like they were served, that they were taken care of at the end of the day. And so I could imagine, companies like Nordstrom and Neiman Marcus and, these larger organizations that offer personal styling services today, to actually be able to do that at much greater scale for a much wider set of consumers, when that can be automated through AI avatars. Their personal stylists now can have high-end, level of experience, or they can have a much more mass level of experience, and people can kind of dial that up and dial it down. But you could also see that coming to life, for companies like Rent the Runway and, Stitch Fix and all these other organizations that are creating these personal styling experiences that right now you're less, having this sort of one-on-one engagement with, but now you could do that through an AI avatar. And I think that would be super exciting. So on the B2C side, I know I was just talking about retail and fashion, but you could imagine that coming to life in lots of different sectors on the B2C side. And then On the B2B side, that relationship is everything, right? We know our sales leaders and our AEs are experts at building those deep connections that grow revenue, grow relationships, expand sales opportunities. But these people are so overwhelmed. They have so much to keep up with. And if they have the ability to sort of amplify their interactions through the use of AI avatars, but to show up as themselves in their most genuine way, in their most human way, and take care of some of those more early stage automate, tasks and automate that, it frees them up to even dive deeper into those in-person relationships that ultimately matter. So I think that's super exciting, and I think there's opportunity on both the B2C side as well to the B2B side
Yeah.
when it comes to the use of avatars.
Yeah, and at the same time, I mean, like taking off repetition is one of the main things I believe, Christine, right? Because now I've been in B2B sales, right? So when it comes to sales pitches, right? So like what you would, I mean, yes, there is a level of customizations that's absolutely required, right? But say if it's sort of like a not really very much of a known product, like, among everyone, like Microsoft or like, Google or whatever, right? So if it's not right, sort of like, the pitch is at least like, about 70% equal, right, from one to the other, right? So how can, I mean, and same goes with even support side as well, right? So then there is a lot of repetition that's involved in the support landscape also, right? So that's why, like, I think support side is like there's a lot of AI coming in terms of automating that, right? But when it comes to sales landscape, what I've seen is like, since that personal, mainly B2B sales I'm talking about, right? So then that personal touch is required, right? So what I believe that would be done with AI avatars coming in, it would allow, I mean, say you can create a digital twin of you, and like, of course, your time is limited. You can spend time on, like, customizing the strategies and all these things. But how can your digital twin avatar be taking up all the, like, boring, mundane tasks, right? So I mean, just to share a story, Christian, like I remember when I was in B2B sales, like say, I mean, there has been times where I've had, say, about 5 sales pitches per day, right? So now imagine, I mean, like, and most of, like, there is about 70% like, 70% repetition coming from one to the other. Now when I'm getting to the fifth, like, pitch, my empathy is not at the best, right? So I would want to, like, because I mean, at the end of the day, sales is supposed to be, I mean, you're supposed to be very much empathetic, right? But at that time, like, it's not at my best, right? So I would, like, sort of brush upon, like, maybe the features, like, and then brush upon, because I want to sort of wrap things up, right? So but at the same time, if that repetitive part can be taken up by AI avatar, right? So my digital twin for that matter, and I can, if I can focus on, say, the relationship, right? Maybe going out for coffee or lunch with the customer, right? And then to know that, like, for them to know that I'm real, and, like, I care, like, the company is empathetic, all those things, right? But how can those, like, boring mundane tasks can be, like, handed over to my AI avatar, right? So that's sort of the context that we are very much progressing towards, per se.
Yeah, and I think I love what you're talking about because you're talking so much about the salesperson's experience, and it matters, right? They're going to show up in their jobs and in their level of service when they feel like they can be at their best self. So I love that you're focused on that from an experience design standpoint, with the use of AI avatars. But if we flip it and we think about, okay, what the buyer experience, right, at the end of the day, many times, particularly early in the process for B2B sales, and we know B2B sales often can be months long, right? That you're going to be making this. This is a very considered decision oftentimes, and there's a lot of people that you need to bring on board through the process. And maybe one of your colleagues couldn't join the meeting, and now you've got to do it again. And that ability to guide people through this longer sales process and show up in these really meaningful ways that actually employees can take and sort of self-amplify inside their organization to create buy-in, I think is a huge opportunity, right? You're not just circulating a deck anymore. You're actually being able to say, oh, colleague so-and-so, you weren't able to attend the sales meeting, but I still want you to meet Arosha. He had a lot of great things to say about this product that could help us. And that ability to sort of self-drive that from the buyer perspective, I think is really exciting. Um, and then also from the buyer perspective, sometimes in those early discovery stages where you're still sort of, shopping your options and educating yourself, particularly when you're educating yourself, you not necessarily want to get on a call with someone just yet, right? You actually just want to ask some basic questions. You want to get familiar with things, and that ability to interact in a really low pressure way with an AI avatar can actually be very endearing in the experience and very
Yeah.
welcoming in the experience, because you've given people a space to sort of self navigate, self Q&A, self explore, and not feel like they have to be, in this high pressure moment of like, I have to either move this forward or close this down. And, they can just sort of be themselves quite naturally, which, oftentimes, we haven't really mastered yet, from an experience design perspective, with the technology that's available today.
Yeah. So the next topic that I would want to bring to conversation is actually the ethical side of it, right? Because now AI is coming into everything, right? So Apple just announced, like, they rebranded AI to be Apple Intelligence, right? So, and but I mean, like, from a privacy standpoint, how they really looked at it is just great, right? So then I think that's something that lot of the other players haven't really, I mean, that's their sort of their typical late mover strategy, right? But like ethical side of, and ethical and compliance side is very much coming up now, right? So because now what I have, like, I have mainly heard these days is like the death of the cookie is coming up, right? Because how we are able to create, like, sort of a like, seemingly seamless experience, like, within, at least from a browser standpoint, is because of the cookie, right? So now there are a lot of, like, problems actually that has caused because of the cookie, right? So at least in the way that as we know it, right? Because like, that was initially used to sort of, like, manage the session, like, manage the login, like, that sort of a thing. But like, now it has become a tracking and, like, major level advertising mechanism right now, like, for that now people are actually quite concerned about it, right? And then, like, now it's sort of like, being looked, like, sort of changed into a different aspect, right? So these were, like, I think even companies like Sixth Sense, what I've seen is like the fact that, like, they are getting into some hot waters these days, right? So with this coming in, I think, like, very much of a ethical consideration and compliance standpoint would very much come in, right? So it needs to be looked at in that perspective. I mean, just as, like, we create very seamless experiences that are omni-channel, that are self-service, that bring, like, predictive analytics, right? But I think, like, this ethical considerations, compliance and privacy, that needs to be looked at um, to a great degree, like, as we continue to create these, like, very um, intuitive experiences with AI being involved.
Agreed. And I think at the end of the day, this is new territory, and it's going to be a lot of trial and error as we kind of navigate the regulatory environment on this in the next few years.
Yeah.
But I would say, we can take some best practices from, prior experiences when sort of tech kind of came in anew. And I think the number one lesson we learned, even as sort of privacy concerns were kind of in the early days of technology, was transparency, right? And brands and companies being very upfront around, what are we doing with your data? How are we getting your data? And giving people the opportunity to opt in and opt out. And if we start to think about interaction design around AI avatars, we actually have a chance to make that way more human than like, hey, click here to our terms and conditions and our privacy statements and our data policies and all these just really cumbersome things that candidly people just kind of gloss, right? We could actually start to think about, how do we design the experience to let people sort of self-navigate what experience they want to have and how much data they're willing to sort of lean into a company or into an experience versus opt out.
Yeah, that's right, Christian. So finally, one thing that you've one of the main titles that I've heard you speaking is like the experience design, right? So can you tell, Christian, like, what would the future of like experience design look like, right? And like, how would AI coming into this experience design would very much like, where businesses are able to give better customer experiences?
Yeah, a few things come to mind. The first is really around personalization. And I think, we talk a lot about meeting people where they are in the journey, but so much to this date, it's very passive at first, right? Brands do all these things to try to anticipate what you want, where you are, and all the things. And our ability to start to think about how do we make it much more interactive, very, very upstage in the funnel and in the journey, I think is super exciting. And I think there's going to be a huge opportunity for all of us to start to think about these new ways in which companies and brands can have that interaction from the very first introduction. And then, really thinking about how we sort of create, when is something sort of this low pressure moment, and giving people the tools to sort of self-navigate, self-explore, have discovery, but do that in that sort of two-way interaction. So that personalization piece, I think, is huge. The other piece that, I really think about is that amplification of colleagues, team members, people who make up the company and the brand, right? We talked about it earlier in the call around, personal stylists in retail being able to show up in new ways well outside the retail store, well outside of one-on-one engagement, all the way to your, sales, your SDRs reaching out in a B2B experience when people are in that early stage discovery. So that amplification of actual people, versus sort of branded characters, I think is really exciting about where things are headed. And it sort of takes all of us as employees of organizations and companies into new spaces and places. And that's really provocative to think about. And then the last one, I think, is the emotional piece that you touched on, right? So much of our interactions with tech to date they don't understand sentiment, or they struggle to understand sentiment versus where things can go. And that notion of thinking about sentiment analysis, natural language processing, and really being so much more human in the entire process end to end, I think is super cool. So that's what gets me excited about where things are headed. Obviously, AI is going to take us to all of these places and spaces, and there's going to be a lot of creative exploration in the years to come. But I think it's a really exciting time to be in the CX space and to be thinking about CX strategy right now, because we've never had greater tools available to us than we have right now.
Yes, absolutely, Christian. So thanks a lot for the wonderful insights, right? And then ideas that you shared, right? And thanks everyone for joining in with us today with Selling with a Robo. See you next week for our next episode. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.